We all know that this country was founded on the separation of church and state. It's what ensures that we have a religiously diverse, pluralistic democracy that will continue to thrive. Today, separation of church and state is in jeopardy. Americans United will be fighting to preserve this foundational principle here at the Supreme Court. My name is Rachel Lazar, and I'm the president and CEO of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. Americans United is defending Bremerton schools against an assault backed by $1 billion shadow network. That network is telling a misleading story about this case. So let's get the facts straight. A public school football coach violated the religious freedom of students when he pressured them to join him in his prayer circle at the 50-yard line following each game. Time and time again, the school district asked him to stop, but he refused, demanding that he be able to continue his prayer practice that we know made some students feel pressured to join. The coach claimed that he just wanted to be able to pray in a private and solitary way. Does that look like a private and personal prayer to you? This is a coach pressuring students to join him in public prayer. That's why a lower court judge called the coach's story a, quote, deceitful narrative. Today, religious freedom is on the line, and it's the religious freedom of students and families, not the coach. Religious freedom is not the right to use your power as a public school coach to impose your beliefs on students. Religious freedom is the shield that protects the freedom of all students to believe as they choose. We're here today defending true religious freedom. We're here defending all students who feel like they have to pray to play football or other school sports. We're here defending non-religious students who are made to feel like outsiders when they don't join the coach's prayers. We're here defending Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, and all religious minority students torn between their desire to feel like full members of the team and their own religion. We're here defending Christian students who don't pray the way their coach does and feel that joining would violate their beliefs. The clergy from Bremerton are here supporting the Bremerton schools and the religious freedom of their students. And I'm here as the head of Americans United and as a mom, concerned like every parent about what happens to my children when they're at school and in the care of coaches and teachers whom I trust to and preach. We're here today as Americans United, defending the separation of religion and government, fighting the shadowy network, aiming to tear down a core pillar of our democracy. We're here today as Americans United because if agents of the state are allowed to impose their religious beliefs on students, we could witness the greatest loss of religious freedom in generations. We're here today as Americans United. And here with me this morning are Congressman Jaime Raskin, AU board member, where is she? Ouida Brown, and a diverse coalition of Bremerton clergy who've flown across the country from Washington to the other to be with us today. First, we're going to hear from Congressman Jaime Raskin, who led a powerful brief in support of the school district on behalf of members of Congress. Congressman, thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody, and a special greeting to our friends from Bremerton, the religious leaders who come all the way across the country to stand up for the First Amendment. And, you know, before I came to Congress, I was a professor of constitutional law for more than a quarter century. And so forgive me, but this gives me the opportunity to talk about a little Supreme Court case law, if you don't mind. It, everything about this case seems perfectly clear to me. I don't think it's a tough case at all. The Supreme Court, in a case called Engel versus Vitale in 1962, struck down New York's practice of composing an official Protestant prayer and then compelling all of the principals and teachers throughout New York to dictate that to the students and requiring the students to participate. And then it was a group of Catholic students and their families who objected to it and brought a First Amendment case and won. And the court determined in a 6-1 vote that it violated the Establishment Clause to have the school composing religious prayers and then dictating those prayers to the students. It violated the rights of students who didn't want to participate, and it constituted an endorsement of religion. Now, some of my colleagues in Congress will say that this decision led to the moral downfall of America when the Supreme Court allegedly banned prayer in the public schools. But the Supreme Court never banned prayer in the public schools. As I like to say, as long as there are pop math quizzes, there will be prayer in the public schools. Anybody can pray whenever they want to pray. But the point is that official employees of the school and officials of the school cannot engage in prayers and then try to get other people to participate with them, because that clearly violates the separation of church and state. And 30 years later, in Lee versus Wiseman, the Supreme Court found the exact same thing in another form of school activity, which is a graduation. And at a middle school graduation, the Supreme Court said that it is coercive to have a religious figure leading students in prayer at the graduation, and that graduation is one of life's great occasions, and you can't violate the First Amendment rights of students as a condition for participating in it. And so the court again struck down another example of public school employees organizing a prayer at an official school ceremony. The final case that related to this is from Texas, called Santa Fe versus Doe. And there, the school system, understanding that it violates the First Amendment Establishment Clause to compel students to participate, said, well, okay, we're going to allow students to pray on the football field, and we're going to have students do it rather than school employees. But the court again struck that down, saying that that was very clearly on school time, on school property, at a school event, and organized by the school system. Okay, so now we have a case where the school district gets it right. The Bremerton School District says, we understand the First Amendment. We understand the Constitution, and no, we're not going to have our employees, who we pay the taxpayer money to, get up and conduct prayers at a football game. We've been here before. And in order to protect the First Amendment rights of the coach who's saying he wants to pray, they create all kinds of opportunities for that coach to go pray someplace else privately without compelling and coercing the students to get involved. But he refuses to do it, and instead of reapplying for his coach position, which all the coaches do, as I understand in Bremerton, he just sued the school system. So what do we have? We have a school district representing the people of Bremerton, standing up for the Constitution and for the First Amendment, and then we have a coach who wants to try to override the rights of the students, override the Establishment Clause, override the First Amendment, and override the will of the school district. Also, he can conduct a display at the 50-yard line during a school event on the hours of his work. And, you know, I think it's an open and shut case. The problem is, of course, we've got a cultural war going on in the country, and I hope that the Supreme Court justices will act like Supreme Court justices and follow the very clear precedent, which establishes that no government employee has the right essentially to take over the job and then violate clear First Amendment precedent. I mean, it is clearly the case that if a public employee wants to pray at his or her desk, he or she can do it. but he or she cannot take over the office and say, and now we're going to have a prayer, and I ask all of you to come and participate in it with me. So the most impressive thing to me is how much the religious leaders of the community are standing up with the school system and standing up with the students here. And why? They understand that the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause stand best when they stand together. Some people like to think that they're in tension with each other, that if you don't allow the school system to establish religion, you're somehow violating the free exercise if somebody wants to do that. But that was not the framers' image of it. The framers understood that the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause reinforce each other. And they stand for the principle that nobody can seize the power of government in order to interfere with other people's religious freedom. And so just like we had Catholic families in New York who objected in Engel versus Vitale, or non-believer families who objected in Lee versus Wiseman, or in Santa Fe versus Doe, Mormon families and Methodist families who felt like they were being turned into dissidents and scapegoats in a majority Southern Baptist community. Here what we have is religious leaders stepping forward and saying, we will stand with the school system because we don't want the football field being turned into a religious battlefield where each sectarian group has to try to compete with each other in order to take over this public space. So everybody has a right to continue to pray on their own time, but you don't need to take the government's time and the prestige of your office to conscript other people to participate in it. So I'm very proud about the amicus brief we submitted, and I want to thank Americans United for organizing this event.
Thank you so much, Congressman Raskin. Next, we'll hear from Ouida Brown, a board member of Americans United, and she's also here as General Counsel of the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church. Ouida?
Good morning. As Rachel said, my name is Ouida Brown, and I'm the General Counsel of the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church. Some may know it as CME. The CME Church has long been committed to protecting and upholding our Constitution's promise of religious freedom for all. And I also serve as a board member of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. The foundational American principle of separation of church and state is the cornerstone of religious freedom. It ensures that the government can't tell us how to practice our faith or whether we have to practice any faith at all. We must be free to believe as we choose, so long as it doesn't harm anyone else. We are not truly free unless we get to make our own decisions about religion. That's why the CME Church joined other religious and denominational organizations and these clergy members that are here today in filing an amicus brief with the Supreme Court. Together, we represent many Christians and non-Christians who support the school district in this case. I'm from Alabama, and you have to admit we know a little bit about football. So I know how much it means for a football player who plays the game. If their coach prays, so will they, even if they don't want to. They will do whatever it takes to make sure that getting playing time is on top of their game or to stay in the coach's good graces. But it is not okay, and it is unconstitutional for public school coaches to pressure students to pray with them. When Coach Kennedy did that, he violated his players' religious freedom. He also pressured them to pray in a distinctly Christian way. But Muslims, Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, and others don't pray that way. In fact, neither do all Christians. And of course, people who aren't religious don't pray at all. Religious practice is too precious to be directed by any public school official. Students and their families must be able to choose how or whether to pray and practice their faith. Just imagine that you're a student whose conscience tells you that you have to walk away from Coach Kennedy's post-game prayers because they conflict with your beliefs. You could potentially open yourself up to being treated as an outsider or being bullied by your teammates and peers, staff, and community members. My church was born into and out of the struggle for freedom. We demanded that we be given our own church just so we could practice our worship and our religious beliefs in our own way. Amen. Not as imposed by others. We were supposedly inside the faith. Obviously, we shared the same religious beliefs, but they saw us as unequal and treated us as outsiders. We were Methodists just like they were. The CME Church believes that freedom is a right, not just a privilege, and religious freedom for all is an absolute right. That's why we believe Bremerton did the right thing. The school protected its students, made sure none were made to feel like outsiders, and stopped the coach's prayer. Today, we hope the Supreme Court will also do the right thing.
Thank you, Rita. Now we'll hear from the Reverend Douglas Aviles Bernal, who's the Executive Minister of the Evergreen Association of American Baptist Churches.
Good morning. As a Baptist preacher, I cannot speak for all Baptists. But as a Baptist preacher, I could speak as a Baptist. And I'll begin with a reminder to my fellow Christians, and maybe an introduction for those of you who might not be Christian, that we Christians argue forcibly about things we think Jesus said or meant that are not in Scripture, and therefore we cannot know whether Jesus said them or meant them. But fortunately, there are things that Jesus did speak on and was clear about, and one of these is very important for this case. Now, this all starts in what we call the Beatitudes, when Jesus speaks to people about how to live. And then Jesus talks about anger and greed, retaliation, love for enemies. But then the 6th chapter of Matthew begins with the following: be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others in order to be seen. Yes. And then, on the 6th verse of Matthew, Jesus says, and whenever you do pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and on the street corners. For a football coach, is there anything more of a street corner than the 50-yard line after a football game? Yes. So my beloved fellow Christians, let us remember that Jesus was always harshest with the leaders, especially when they were exercising their leadership, because Jesus knew that people follow leaders in what they do and what they see them do, especially those who are under their guidance, like, say, football players under the coach's guidance. As a Baptist preacher, of course, I encourage all to get to know Jesus deeply, get to know his words. I also encourage all to get in deep into Scripture, and most importantly, I always say to everybody, pray more than you're praying, no matter how much you're already praying. I'm praying right now, so that's not the question. But as soon as other people come to where you are because of how you're praying, it is no longer a private prayer. And therefore, it is against Jesus' command for us to carry out our prayers. Now, moving a little bit about Baptists, the reason there are millions of Baptists in this country is twofold. The first is because, well, we share a lot of the gospel. I'm sure you have heard about Jesus from at least one Baptist in your lifetime. But the other reason is that those who were in power in this country decided to give up some of their power to say, we're not going to have our faith be imposed on others, so that other people could also exercise their faith. The reason there are so many of us here is because when we were not in power, those who were in power said it was okay for people like us, outsiders, to be able to do our prayers. Therefore, as soon as Mr. Kennedy prayed, once people knew what he was doing, it was no longer a private prayer. When people were rushing the field, startling high school band players so they could go pray, that was no longer a private prayer. And therefore, it was against what Jesus tells us to do. So I am here for that reasons and many others, with this building behind me, this sacred civic building behind me, to try and ask the justices to yet again uphold that which the justices on which shoulders they stand have upheld for generations, and which has been appropriately enshrined in our Constitution. And personally, I would say that if we Christians feel that our country has gone down and away from morality, the last thing we should do is ask the government to fix it for us. If the blame lies somewhere, it is in our churches. So the question of morality is for us, not for the government to enforce our understanding of morality. And lastly, I would say, please, that's not what I wanted to say. Please let us not sully the sacredness of prayer by making it just another tool in our very human culture wars. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Reffner. Next, we'll hear from Pastor Meg Dowling from Bremerton United Methodist Church.
Good morning. My name is Reverend Megan Dowling, and I am the pastor of Bremerton United Methodist Church, located just a mile or so from Bremerton High School, and home to a diverse congregation that includes a number of current and former Bremerton High School students. I am here this morning to voice my support for the actions taken by the Bremerton High School District and the decisions made by the lower courts. As a person of faith and as a local pastor, I believe that prayer is a sacred act. Prayer should never be used to pressure, coerce, manipulate, or otherwise harm any of its participants. But unfortunately, this is exactly the result of Coach Kennedy's public prayers. When he intertwined his prayer with his post-game pep talks, he made it impossible for vulnerable students to opt out without risking their place on the team. When students could not consent to being part of this prayer, their religious liberties were violated. Prayer is expected and welcome in houses of worship. But Coach Kennedy only wanted to pray at the 50-yard line. Students have the right to engage in and lead voluntary prayer. Millions do it every day. But Coach Kennedy was not a student. He is a state employee paid with my tax dollars. The United States of America is not a theocracy. Our founding fathers and mothers believed in and codified a separation of church and state, which is fundamental to our individual and collective freedoms. Students should feel safe in public schools, and their constitutional rights should not be infringed upon by their trusted authority figures. This is especially important for students from a non-Christian background. They should never be marginalized or pressured or excluded in any way. They deserve to have their faith or non-faith respected by their teachers and coaches. They deserve to be valued and included in the classroom and on the football field. As a pastor, I understand Coach Kennedy's desire to live out his personal faith, but I strongly disagree with his actions. It is my hope that the Supreme Court will uphold the rulings of the lower courts this morning and protect the religious liberty of all of our students. I hope that the separation of church and state will continue to be a cornerstone of our democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Dowling. Next is Emily Catcher, a student rabbi at Beth Hatikva in Bremerton, the only synagogue in Bremerton.
In any country where Jewish people have lived, we have a history of being the other, of being oppressed, of being told that we are less than. When we come to America, as we have lived so happily and so freely for so long, we feel deep gratitude in our everyday lives for the separation of church and state, that we are free to be Jews, to pray as Jews and live as Jews, as full citizens of this country, that our children go to public schools for which we pay taxes and are taught by teachers who will not treat them as less than. We want to maintain those freedoms, not just for Jews, but members of any minority religion. Our Muslim children, our Hindu children, our Sikh children, all of our children who are Unitarians, our children who are atheists. All of those children should have the sovereignty of their inner life. It is not upon our teachers and coaches to tell our children how they are to relate to the Holy One or not. It is upon them to instruct them not only in their topic, but how to live together as a diverse nation, how to honor and respect one another. The coach, a teacher, clergy person, is in a position of power with relation to a child. And that includes a great big 17-year-old football player. They're in charge. And when there is a power dynamic like this, we know that the issue of consent changes. The ability to consent changes. It is upon us as the adults to guard the agency of our children. As Jews, we are told that one of the worst things that we can do to another person, we learn this by Sanhedrin and Talmud, is to shame them, to other them, to humiliate them. It is considered to be an irreparable damage. When we tell some of our children that they are less than because they are not a part of the loudest religion, the most powerful religion, the one with the most authority, we shame them. We make them feel humiliated, and they worry. Can I be who I am in this country, in this school, in my town, in Bremerton? And I've come here to represent the Jews of Bremerton and to tell them, yes, you can. And we here will stand up for you and make sure that who you truly are is protected and loved by all the adults in your life.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you, Student Rabbi Pastor. Next, we'll hear from Pastor Gregory Reffner from Brownsville United Methodist Church in Bremerton.
Good morning. My name is Reverend Gregory Reffner, and it is my pleasure to serve the people of Brownsville United Methodist Church in Bremerton, Washington. And I'm here today to support and add my voice to the list of others here, my friends, supporting the Bremerton School District. I know that it is likely surprising for many of you, some of you, to see so many Christian faith leaders here in particular voicing their support for the school district as opposed to Coach Kennedy. You might think that as a Christian, I should support Coach Kennedy's prayer practice on the 50-yard line after the football games at Bremerton High School's Memorial Stadium. I can certainly see how you might think that. I want to tell you why I am taking the stance that I am. As a Christian leader and as a pastor, one thing that I regularly teach and preach in my congregation is that Christians ought to follow the example of our God and continually examine the power and privilege that we hold and consider what it looks like to let go of that power and privilege so that our local neighborhoods might reflect the communities of love that Jesus came to establish. And while it saddens me to say this, Christians throughout our history have enjoyed authority and power in the public sphere that religious minorities and folks who do not adhere to a faith can only dream of. This unexamined privilege appeared most potently for me on January 6, 2021, when I saw American citizens attack the United States Capitol, but a stone's throw away from where we stand today. I saw citizens attack the United States Capitol bearing flags with the name of a president in one hand and flags with the name of Jesus in the other. That day represents an exceptional example of the power Christian nationalism holds yet in our country. Christians committing acts of violence and destruction, attempting to overthrow the democratic processes of this country in order to impose their will. Now, let me be clear. I am not suggesting that Coach Kennedy had anything to do with that day. If that's what you take away from my words this morning, you've missed the point. However, I am suggesting that Christian nationalism provides the fertile ground for what we witnessed on that day and what the community of Bremerton witnessed when Coach Kennedy led Christian prayers on the 50-yard line. I am confident that Coach Kennedy had no intention of coercing any of his players to participate in his prayers. But when you thoroughly examine power and privilege, you don't just look at someone's intent. You must also look at the impact that their actions had. And the fact is that Coach Kennedy was in a position of authority and power. He was a man looked up to by his players, making calls about who played and who sat on the bench. And when he began leading Christian prayer on the 50-yard line, he was forcing, even if unintentionally, his players to make a choice between being a part of the team and adhering to their faith commitments. And for me, even the presence of this question, the possibility of public high school students having to wonder whether or not they would receive consequences if they did not participate in the post-game huddle or prayer, says to me that the separation of church and state is being threatened. That's why we're here today, and that is what this case is all about. So again, today, I stand with the Bremerton School District and with my neighbors in Bremerton, those who are religious minorities, those who are Christians, and those who choose to be non-religious. I stand with them because I believe that in our country, everyone has the right to choose what they believe and how they believe, so long as it does not harm another. I hope and pray that the Supreme Court will uphold the rulings made by the lower courts, and by doing so, they will have upheld religious freedom, not just for some, but for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Reffner. Reverend Kathleen Kingsley from St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Bremerton will be our last speaker. Bring it home.
Whoa. Pressure is on, right? Can you feel the power, the influence, the conversations? I mean, we've got a congressman, we got lawyers, we got clergy people. Look at all of these good people behind us here. There is a lot of power and influence that is gathered here today. I'm wearing a wonderful collar that kills ticks and fleas for 30 days. But this silly thing does give power to the work that I do in the church. The stole, the clothing, they all say to others, oh, that's a clergy person. Okay, well, it doesn't say it to everybody. If you're a man, it works better than for a woman. Usually it's a fashion statement for women. But you look at me, though, as just a regular person, and you wouldn't think power, authority. Within the context of my community, I have power and authority. By means of ordination, by means of clothing, by means of the job. Okay? So, it takes time to develop that kind of relationship with people, and a coach is wonderfully placed to be able to create relationships, to require commitment, to require steadfastness in coming to the practices, in being on a team and participating all together. They develop such relationships that the team, the coach himself is the one who is able to say, come to this extra practice, come do this with me. If he takes the knee, they will take the knee. If he prays on the 50-yard line, a powerful symbol, a powerful place, they will do the same. When he was restricted from doing that anymore, did the kids go out there to do it? Did they pray anymore? They didn't. They did not anymore. The kids follow the coach's leadership because of his power, because of his influence. And if they have a belief that's different, perhaps in Allah, or the Jewish expression of their forefathers, or in no faith at all, will those kids let go of their own faith so that they can support the coach? I have 2 neuroatypical children. I know what they would do. They'd be right there with the coach. They don't have the wherewithal to be able to stand up and say, no, I don't want to pray that way. They wouldn't be able to do it. They just wouldn't be capable. So, kids want to fit in. How many of you wanted to fit in when you were in high school? I hope so. I mean, it's pretty typical, right?
Very good point.
Yep. And
Very good point.
to be able to stand up and say, I don't want to pray that way. I don't want to be in the public or praying. I don't want to follow what the coach is doing and to risk my position on the team. Most of us wouldn't have that kind of courage as a high school kid. All right, so perhaps there are some teenagers that are out there who have that kind of strength, and they stand up and say, no, I'm not going to pray with the coach on the 50-yard line.
then what are their peers going to do? How many of you remember what bullying was like in high school? Let me see some hands. Come on. Yes. And it still affects you today. Imagine what those kids would be going through if they refused to follow what the coach was doing. Using one's power to override the religious freedom of others is wrong. It's against the boundaries set up by the school district in Bremerton. It rips away the boundaries of the Constitution and amendments meant to protect our religious freedom. And his 50-yard line prayers, vocally done, contradict the evangelical faith that he so strongly lives by and teaches. It says in Scripture, do not stand in the public places and pray, because that is the way the hypocrites do it.
Yes.
So let's keep faith and government in their own lanes so that our kids can live the freedoms we all so value.
Thank you, Reverend Kingsley. And thank you all for showing up for religious freedom and for our democracy. Oral argument is set to begin in about, I think, 5 minutes, and you can hear a live stream on supremecourt.gov or C-SPAN. The clergy and I will be back at the court after arguments along with our legal director, Richard Katsky, who's arguing the case right in there. And at this key moment, I want to thank you all for showing up for freedom without favor and equality without exception. Woo-hoo.